Sometimes I feel like my life is a story written by a lazy fanfic author. And today I want to tell you about that. So, first, what do I mean? You know, those stories where it's just like everything fits together too conveniently. It's like, yeah, I guess that leads into that, but like, that's way too convenient to like actually happen. And there's no conflict, there's no tension to the story. Well, let me tell you about today. First, some background. Um, I someone had dropped on my dance Discord server a an invite to Thomas Schelling Appreciation Day. I don't know what that is. Let me look into it. And so I looked it up, and he was a Nobel Prize winner who did work in game theory, and he had done work on this idea called the Schelling point. He says if you need to meet with a friend, you can just tell them, you only need to communicate. I will meet you at the obvious place at the obvious time. And that's all you really need to say. And now you're not just thinking about where do I go, you're thinking about where would the other person think that I would go, and where do I think the other person will go. And so you can often converge onto a single point. And so Thomas Schelling Appreciation Day says this: on the obvious day, actually the Saturday after for obvious reasons, go to the obvious place at the obvious time. Bring the obvious book and the obvious item, and at the obvious cue, you sing the obvious song. And I just thought that was such a cool idea. And so I was really excited. I was talking to a bunch of my friends about it. I figured out exactly which day I thought it would be, being the Saturday after Thomas Schelling's birthday. And so I was hoping to convince some friends to come along. One of the things that it suggested was go with friends, because that way if nobody else shows up, at least you're with one other person you can hang out with, which is entirely fair. It also said, if you show up and anyone else is there for the same reason, then you have attended a Thomas Schelling Appreciation Day event. Maybe it's not the largest, but you've succeeded at being at one. And so I talked to a number of my friends, and I was talking with them and trying to understand where do they think the most obvious place is, because I already had somewhere in mind, but I wanted to understand what other people were thinking. And I decided to go to the Space Needle. Since I'm in Seattle, it's like the big tall thing. That's everyone, that's like the symbol of Seattle. And do so at noon, because that's the time that Thomas Schelling had done his research and said, that's the time to show up. And so I start out the day, get all dressed up. I've got my kilt on. I've got my bag. I brought an instrument. I brought a sign, because I don't know if anyone's going to be there. I don't know if I'm just going to be like sitting there by myself, just like waiting until people show up. And so I get there. I get off the light rail, and I'm like, okay, where do I go to get to the Space Needle? And I'm like, oh, I guess that's the Space Needle right there. And, it's right there. And I walk over, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to recognize anyone if they're here? And I see this group of people off to the side. They look like fairly nerdy people. A bigger group than I expected. And then there's the one person who I knew was going to be there, Spencer. And so I go up and I join the group, and I'm chatting, and we're all talking as a group, and someone, people are welcoming me in. Someone looks at me, and they're really curious in my pocket, and they say, "Is that a slide rule?" And I grab it out. I'm like, "Oh no, this is not a slide rule. It's just a precision ruler." And they're like, "That's so cool." And someone says, "How often is that actually useful?" And I say, "Well, just the other day, true story, someone sent me a picture. And in this picture, there was a telescope. And so I wanted to know exactly what kind of telescope it was and what size. And so I took my ruler and I measured the eyepiece, which I know to be 1.25 inches diameter. And I measured the telescope tube and I scaled them and I figured, oh, it's an 8-inch telescope. And I let them know, I recognize your telescope. And the person says, yes, but was that useful? And I said, well, it was right. And the whole group just like burst out into laughter. Delightful welcoming into a new group of people, utter strangers. But like, I figured I was going to hit it off with these people. Throughout this event, we chatted for a while. It was really interesting watching the dynamic go from large group of people where one person is talking and then someone else will respond. It's a bit it's popcorn, but like we're all one group and one conversation, and it was it was really cool to meet everyone. So it went from that to being smaller groups of people, 4, 5-ish people, and so you can walk around, meet other people. There's these small conversations and really good opportunity. And so I'm chatting with people. I end up chatting with the backup. We did a number of games, and so we've got everyone in this big circle, and the organizer comes by and he says, "Okay, here's my phone. On it, there are buttons. If you press the same button as the previous person, you will get that number of Skittles or M&Ms or some other candy that I don't recognize." And they start going around, and it gets to me, and I look at it, and the numbers are, as I remember them, 10, 10, 2, 10, 10, 10. And so I grabbed the top one, and that's what the previous person had done. And so he says, "Great. Do you want Skills, M&Ms, or dimes?" I said, "Well, I'll take dimes, because I haven't had dimes. I don't know what they are." I'm like, I don't know, new candy. I'll try that. And he goes all the way around. Oh, that's what I was thinking. But what I said was, "I'll take dimes because I want to make you go all the way back there to grab them, because I can see he doesn't have them in his hand." So he comes back to me a bit later and he hands me a $1 bill. I'm like, "Oh, that kind of dimes. That's what you meant." I'm like, "All right, whatever. I've got $1 now. Like, I don't really use cash, but like, now I have $1." A bit later in the day, we had another game, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to do an auction. It's called a dollar auction. Whatever you submit as a bid, you are obligated to pay, even if you don't win the bid. So whatever you bid, you will pay. But you, but who's interested?" So we get it. I raise my hand. We get like three people. And so we come over and the bid is specifically, the thing we're bidding on is a $20 bill. And so someone says 1 cent. And I'm thinking, I have this $1 bill that he gave me. It'd be really funny if I gave it back to him. And so I bid $1. And I'm talking with the other people. I'm like, "Here, let me. I'll take it, and then I'm just gonna give both of you $10, because like the story is way more important to me than than the cash." And so that's a win-win for everyone except for me, but I get my story, and so I win. And so they're like, "Yeah, that's perfect." So I bid my $1, and he and they all agree that's good. And so I grab their Venmos and I send each of them $10, or simple to them $10. And here I am with with $20 of cash. And earlier in the day, there would have been if you had brought the same book as he brought, he would reimburse you. And so he had given me $20 for that. And so I'm chatting with the organizer and someone else there, and I say, yeah, I realize I've net zeroed this entire day, but I now have $40 of cash because I spent $20 on the book, and then I got $20 reimbursement for the book, and then I got $1 from the earlier game, which I then spent to get $20, but then I gave those $20 to two other people, and so I net zeroed. And someone turns to me and says, "John, you are a macroeconomical miracle. You should change your username, John Macroeconomic Miracle Hollerin." And I thought that was hilarious. And so, great time with these folks. We end up going to a nearby place and grabbing lunch because at this point it's about 1 o'clock, and we go grab lunch. It was a bit noisy in there, so we went out to the grass and we're just hanging out, talking about different things. I'm starting to become familiar with the rationality group in Seattle, and it seems really interesting. I have to go spend some time with them, and we were talking about different board games and party games and different ways they can be really interesting, asymmetric or cooperative or semi-cooperative, and cool things like that. And at some point, it's getting on the day. I'm thinking, okay, I should probably think about leaving. Someone's like, "Oh, well, what's the obvious time to leave?" Because that's we've been making jokes about all day about oh, the obvious place and the obvious time. And so I check my phone, and there's a message from Barnabas, because I had put onto my family Discord server, I put something about, "Oh, I've been called a macroeconomic miracle," and then I said, "Oh yeah, I'm hanging out with really, really cool people," and Barnabas says, "Hey John, I've got a friend who's in Seattle right now. They said they're going to a museum. They're from Maryland, but they're just visiting for a few days, and they're at a museum." I'm like, that would be cool, because where I am, I'm sitting on the grass in the Seattle Center, and in the Seattle Center, in fact, right behind the person I'm talking to, right in my line of sight, is this Pacific Science Center, which I've never actually been to, and I spend very little time in this area. But they'd be hilarious. And so I read on, and he says, "Oh, I actually missed a message." And Barnabas says, "He's in the Pacific Science Center." And I'm like, well, now I have to. This is way too good. And so I say my goodbyes there, and I start walking over, and I try calling Barnabas, and it's not going through. But he's coordinating between the two of us. And I walk into the Science Center, and I see there's this little courtyard. And so I'm like on this balcony, I'm looking down, and there's someone who has a telescope set up. And so I'm like, "Oh, a telescope, that's really cool." They're like set up on the sun. That must be, oh, wait a minute. That's Winston. I know Winston. I haven't seen Winston in a while. I want to go talk to Winston. And so I go down, and he's looking at something, and I walk up and I say, "Hey, that's a nice looking telescope." And he looks at me and says, "Hey, John." And so I start chatting with him, and it was a great chat. And he says, "Oh, we've got 2 more people manning a booth inside." I'm like, wow, this is way too convenient. Clearly, I have to do this. And so I grab a ticket and go into the Science Center. And at this point, the person I was meeting with, Connor, had said what they were wearing, what he was wearing, and where he was. And so I walk right in, and pretty quickly I see him, he sees me. We walk up to each other, say hi, and start chatting. Really cool guy. I can see why Barnabas recommended talking with him. And he's there with his family, and I got to meet some of them. got caught up and took a photo to show that we did actually get to meet up. And after that, I went out and went to the astronomy booth where my friend Kirti is manning, as is Keith. And so Kirti is taking a video, is like taking a video of the booth, and so I just kind of, sidle up, there, and I'm just like, I don't want to interrupt while she takes her video, and I said something as after she finished, and she starts to respond, looks up and says, "Oh, hey, John." And so I got to chat with her and catch up with her, and then I walked over to Keith, and Keith's not paying any attention. He's showing some kids this big screen. He's got Neptune. I'm like, "Oh, is that Neptune?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's." "Oh, hey, John." And so I got to meet up with all sorts of cool people, and just like not exactly what I expected. And so chat with them a while. Winston came back in, got to chat with him, and eventually I go to leave. And as I'm leaving, I see a booth that is for salinity, because there's all these different booths for all these different science things. And fact of the matter is, I'm pretty pooped at this point. It's like 4 o'clock, and yeah, it's been a high energy day. And so I'm walking out, but like at the same time, I've been working on this submarine, and I'm really interested in maritime science, and I'm really interested in like remote operated vehicle, ROV. So it's an unmanned, it's a robotic submarine that we're designing. And I'm really interested in like, how do you do this, and what resources are available nearby? Maybe there's people I can talk to. I'm like, if there's anyone here who knows who to talk to, it's gonna be that booth. And so I turn around. I'm like 2 steps away from the door, and I'm like, I can't leave. I've got to turn around. And so I walk back, and I start chatting with them, and they have these. They have this big tube. I can tell it's got some sensors and whatnot. And then they have these little bottles, these little squirt bottles. And I'm chatting with him, and he says, "Yeah, grab a cup and squirt like 2 squirts from this bottle, and then taste it, drink it, and then go down the line. Tell us what you think." And so I grabbed the first one, I taste it, and I'm like, it's definitely salty, but it's like salty that you'd try to make like in a kitchen setting. It's not like getting a mouthful of ocean water. And then the next one, it's like, oh, it's like salty, but like I could drink that, especially if I'm really thirsty. And then the last one, it's like, oh, this is clearly like not salty at all. It tastes a little bit sweet. And he's like, "Yep, you're exactly right. That first one is a third, is 1% saltiness, and then the next one is 0.5% salinity, and the next one's just regular tap water with no salt." And you were talking about it, he's got a map of salinity in the oceans, and it ranges, in the like 3 to 4% range, and they also have another set of salt waters that are 3 to 4%, and I try those, and those are salty. And so I'm chatting, and then we get to look at the machine he has, and it's a salinity tester. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm like, he asked me like, how do you sense salinity? I'm like, well, I know my science. And so I start looking at it, and I'm like, oh, well, here's your science, and here's your engineering, and here's how this thing works. And like, I'm looking at and figuring out all these details, and lovely little chat with him. And then I turn to him and I say, "Hey, I'm working on this like ROV project. Really interested in just like, building something with my friends, and like, it's not sponsored or anything. We're just having fun with it. And like, who would I talk to who might be able to like, is there anyone I can talk to who might have access to pressure chambers that I can do for testing? Because we need to test our the structural design." And he thinks about it. He's like, well, there's no one at this science center that I can think of directly, but send an email to this email address and they'll forward it on. Like, yeah, there's people in at UW. This is definitely a thing that you can probably make happen. And so and so that was great. And I go to leave and I see there's another booth. And this booth has this big like Boyu, definitely a floating device, and I can see inside it has some electronics. And so I'm like, ooh, electronics. I want to understand how this works. And so I stop and I'm just looking into the electronics. And someone comes over and they're like, oh, do you have any questions? I'm like, don't say anything about it yet. I just want to understand how this works first. I want to see if I can figure it out. And so I'm like, oh, interesting. You've got GPS in there, but you've got this other chip. Is this like space to or ground to space like satellite comms? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, which constellation do you use? And they're like, oh, we use Iridium. And I'm like, oh, interesting. What are these other constellations? And so we start chatting about space things and science things and electronics things, and they get to explain in great detail all of the electronics and really cool chat with that guy. And then at the end, I said the same thing. I'm like, oh, well, I'm really interested in this stuff because I'm working on this ROV project and trying to understand the hardware, and I'm trying to understand what facilities there might be for testing, and he gives me some context as well. And so now, I've got some people I can reach out to, some projects I can look into as well. And so really cool. I'm so glad I stopped at those two booths, and we'll see where that goes. And now I'm pooped. It's 5 p.m. and I'm done. And I could have stayed and explored the science center and all the different displays, but the fact of the matter is I've had enough, and I'm going to head home. And I go to get on the light rail, or the monorail rather, and the line is just bad. It's longer than the monorail is, and I'm like, well, guess I'm gonna walk. And so I walked. It was a mile back, and get back and on the light rail, and we get off the light rail. I'm almost home. My day's almost done. My story's almost over. And there's this guy who has this big hard case. It's on wheels. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, I don't know what that is. I'm guessing it's a musical instrument, but like, I don't know. And I look over at the elevator. There's like 2/3 of the people have gotten on the elevator. There's room for like one more person. And the other people are going to grab the next elevator. And someone like motions to me, like, get on the elevator. Like, we'll hold the door for you. I'm like, no, it's fine. It's fine. And so the door starts to close, and I turn to this guy and I say, what instrument's in there? And he says, oh, it's actually for golf clubs. And I'm thinking, oh, that's boring. And then he says, but it's actually full of swords, fencing swords right now. And I'm like, of course it is. Of course it is. Why would my day not end with like me chatting with a random guy who has a full case of swords on the light rail? Like, of course. And so that was my day. Written by a lazy fanfic author, not a bad fanfic author, just a lazy one. I have had a delightful day. I thought today was going to be my quiet day for the weekend because tomorrow I start at 3 a.m. I have to be somewhere at 3 a.m., that is. And I have plans until like 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. And so that's tomorrow. Tomorrow I thought was going to be my chaotic day. And today ended up taking me 24 minutes just to tell my story. And so, yes, at one point I was home for Christmas and my sister-in-law Rachel turned to me and said, John, what story did you just walk out of? And I think about that all the time. What story did I walk out of? What's going on? And that's not even to mention the numerous people who made comments to me as I walked by in my kilts. One person looked at me and said something along the lines of, "You look like you would be right in place in an Austin Powers movie." And I just thought that was hilarious. And so, yeah, what story did I just walk out of?